I was sitting on the nursery floor at 5 in the morning, breastfeeding my daughter for the third time that night, when my mother-in-law pushed the door open without knocking. She looked at me, exhausted, milk-stained, barely able to keep my eyes open, and she said, "Stop your drama. Come make breakfast. 6 a.m. Your father-in-law doesn't like to wait." I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh, to say she was joking. She wasn't. What she didn't know was that I had found something the night before, hidden in a drawer she thought I'd never open. A document with my late father's signature on it, a signature that had been copied onto something I never agreed to sign. By the time breakfast was on the table that morning, I already knew exactly how I was going to destroy the life she built on my silence. My name is Emily Carter, and this is the story of how the woman who called my motherhood a piece of theater ended up losing everything she stole to build her perfect little kingdom. Before I tell you what happened in that kitchen 6 months later, let me take you back to where it all started. Because you need to understand who I was before I became someone Linda Carter never expected me to be. I grew up in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio, raised by my father after my mother passed away when I was 9. My dad, Robert Hensley, was a quiet man who worked as an electrician for almost 30 years, and every single dollar he saved for me. He used to tell me, "Em, I don't have much to give you, but I'll make sure you never have to depend on anyone who doesn't deserve you." I didn't understand how important those words were until years later, when I was standing in a kitchen that wasn't mine, married to a man who wouldn't look me in the eye while his mother humiliated me. I met Daniel Carter at a friend's wedding when I was 26. He was charming, funny, worked in his family's construction business, and for the first year he made me feel like the luckiest woman alive. His mother, Linda, was polite in the beginning, the kind of polite that I later realized was just a performance for guests. His father, Gerald, mostly stayed quiet, buried in the newspaper or the television, letting Linda run every single decision in that household like she was the CEO of the family. Daniel had a younger sister, Ashley, who was Linda's favorite in every possible way, the golden child who could do no wrong even when she did everything wrong. When Daniel proposed, I was overjoyed. My father walked me down the aisle 8 months later, and it was one of the happiest days of my life, mostly because I still had him there beside me. 2 years after the wedding, my father passed away suddenly from a heart attack. Was destroyed. He was the only family I truly had, the only person who had never made me feel small. When his estate was settled, I inherited a little over $400,000, the result of decades of savings, smart investing, and a life insurance policy he'd kept up since I was a child. It wasn't just money to me, it was every sacrifice he ever made, sitting quietly in an account with my name on it. I told Daniel about it because I trusted him completely. I did not expect that conversation to eventually reach his mother's ears within days. Linda suddenly became warmer toward me after that, inviting me over more, asking about our future as a family, talking about how expensive raising children could be and how smart families plan together. At the time, grieving and exhausted, I thought she was finally accepting me. I had no idea I was being set up. About a year after my father passed, I got pregnant with our daughter, Sophie. Daniel was thrilled, and so, apparently, was Linda, though her excitement had a strange edge to it, like she was already planning something around this pregnancy rather than simply celebrating it. During my 3rd trimester, Daniel suggested we move in with his parents temporarily to save money before the baby comes, promising it would only be for a few months while we found a bigger place. Grieving, hormonal, and trying to keep peace in my marriage, I agreed. That decision changed everything. The moment we moved into that house, the mask Linda wore around me completely disappeared. She stopped pretending to be warm, She started treating me like unpaid help who happened to be carrying her grandchild. "You're not working right now, so you should be doing more around the house," she told me when I was 7 months pregnant and could barely bend down to tie my shoes. Daniel never disagreed with her, not once. He would just shrug and say, "That's just how mom is. Don't take it personally." I took it personally every single day. When Sophie was born, I expected things to soften, at least a little. They got worse. Linda insisted I sleep in the nursery, so I wouldn't disturb Daniel's sleep before work, which meant I was doing every single night feeding alone while he slept peacefully down the hall. I was exhausted in a way I had never known exhaustion could feel, the kind that sits behind your eyes and never fully leaves. And still, every single morning at 6 a.m. sharp, I was expected to be in that kitchen, cooking a full breakfast for Gerald, Daniel, and whoever else happened to be there, regardless of how many times I'd been up with Sophie that night. If breakfast was 5 minutes late, Linda would sigh loudly and say things like, "Some of us have real jobs to get to," as if raising a newborn on almost no sleep wasn't real work. Ashley, meanwhile, barely lifted a finger in that house, and whenever she did show up, Linda fawned over her like she was doing the family a favor by simply existing. I started noticing something else, too. Every time I brought up finding our own place, Linda would suddenly change the subject, or Daniel would say, "Let's wait a little longer. Mom needs help around here." I didn't understand why they were so desperate to keep us there until the night I found the drawer. It was a Tuesday night, and Sophie had finally fallen asleep after nearly 2 hours of crying from what I now know was a growth spurt. I went downstairs to grab a fresh burp cloth from the laundry room, which was connected to Gerald's small home office, and the office light was still on, door slightly open. I wasn't snooping. I want to be clear about that. I was simply passing by when I noticed a folder sitting open on the desk with my father's name printed across the top in bold letters. My heart stopped. I stepped inside and looked closer, and what I found made my hands shake so badly I almost dropped the papers. It was a document authorizing a transfer of $250,000 from an account that had originally been set up in my name, the account that held part of my father's inheritance, into a joint family investment account controlled by Gerald and Linda Carter. At the bottom was a signature that looked exactly like mine. Never signed that document. I stood there staring at it for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing back through the last year, trying to remember any moment where I might have signed something without fully reading it. There wasn't one. I would never, under any circumstances, sign away $250,000 of my late father's money without knowing exactly what it was for. I quietly took a picture of every page in that folder with my phone, my hands trembling the entire time, terrified of getting caught, terrified of what this meant, terrified of what kind of people I had let into my daughter's life. I went back upstairs and sat on the nursery floor for the rest of the night, holding Sophie, staring at those photos on my phone, feeling a rage I had never felt before in my life. This wasn't just disrespect anymore. This was theft. This was fraud committed against a grieving widow's daughter, using her own father's memory as the vehicle. I didn't say a single word the next morning. I made breakfast at 6 a.m. exactly as Linda demanded, and I smiled while I did it, because for the first time since moving into that house, I understood something crucial. If I reacted emotionally, if I screamed or cried or confronted them without proof, they would simply deny everything, gaslight me, and Daniel would likely believe his mother over me, just like he always did. I needed to be smarter than that. I needed evidence, patience, and a plan. That morning, standing at the stove flipping eggs while Linda criticized how I was cutting the fruit, I made a silent promise to myself and to my father's memory. I was going to get every single dollar back, and I was going to make sure Linda and Gerald Carter faced real consequences for what they had done, legally, completely, and without ever raising my voice. The next few weeks were some of the hardest acting performances of my life. I continued cooking breakfast, cleaning up after everyone, tending to Sophie through sleepless nights, all while quietly building a case against the people I lived with. During the day, whenever I got a small window while Sophie napped, I researched. I learned about undue influence, financial elder abuse laws that also apply to vulnerable adults recovering from grief and postpartum exhaustion, forged signature claims, and how forensic document examiners could compare signatures to prove forgery. I reached out to an old college friend, Rachel Nguyen, who had become a family law and financial fraud attorney in Cleveland. I called her from my car one afternoon, under the excuse of running errands, and I told her everything. Rachel went quiet for a moment before saying, "Emily, this is serious. If what you're describing is accurate, this isn't just a family disagreement, this could be criminal fraud and forgery on top of civil theft." She told me exactly what I needed to gather: bank statements showing the transfer, the original account documents with my real signature for comparison, any communication where Linda or Gerald referenced the money, and if possible, proof that I never authorized or was ever informed about this transfer. Over the next month, I moved like a ghost through that house, quiet, observant, and calculating. I requested copies of my original bank statements online, careful to do it from my phone with notifications silenced so Daniel wouldn't see anything on our shared laptop. I found old text messages between Daniel and Linda from months earlier. Messages he had apparently forgotten were still in his phone, that I saw briefly when he asked me to find a photo for him. Messages where Linda said things like, "The inheritance transfer is handled. Don't mention it to Emily until she's more settled after the baby." Don't mention it to Emily. Reading those words felt like a physical blow, confirmation that my own husband knew about this and chose his mother's plan over honesty with his wife. I took screenshots of everything, backed them up to a private cloud, account Daniel didn't know existed, and continued smiling through dinners where Linda bragged to her friends about helping the young couple get on their feet financially. The lowest point for me came on a Sunday afternoon about 6 weeks after I found that folder. Sophie had been sick with a mild fever, up crying most of the previous night, and I was running on maybe 3 hours of broken sleep. Linda had invited her sister and a few family friends over for lunch, and she expected me to prepare the entire spread while also caring for a sick infant. When I gently mentioned that I was exhausted and asked if we could order food instead, Linda looked at me in front of everyone and said, "This is exactly why young mothers today have it so easy complaining about nothing. When I had Daniel and Ashley, I never once asked anyone to do things for me." Everyone laughed politely, and Daniel, sitting right there, said nothing in my defense, not one word. I excused myself, went into the bathroom, locked the door, and cried harder than I had cried since my father's funeral. I felt invisible, disrespected, and completely alone in a house full of people, holding a secret that could blow their entire comfortable life apart. And yet I felt powerless in that moment because I still didn't have everything I needed. That night, after everyone left, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and I heard my father's voice in my head, calm and steady the way it always was. I don't have much to give you, but I'll make sure you never have to depend on anyone who doesn't deserve you." He gave me exactly what I needed to fight back, and I had almost let his memory get buried under exhaustion and self-pity. That night marked my turning point. I stopped feeling sorry for myself and started moving with purpose. The very next morning, I scheduled a private meeting with Rachel, using a pediatrician appointment for Sophie as my cover story to Linda. Rachel reviewed everything I brought her, The screenshots, the bank documents, the folder photos, the text messages, she confirmed what I already suspected, that this had all the markings of financial exploitation and forgery, serious enough to pursue both a civil case for recovery of funds and, depending on further evidence, potential criminal forgery charges. You're going to need a forensic handwriting expert to formally compare the signature, Rachel explained. But based on what you've shown me, you have a strong foundation. We also need to establish a paper trail showing you never had access to or knowledge of this joint account until you discovered it. Rachel connected me with a forensic document examiner named Patricia Alvarez, who specialized in exactly these kinds of cases. Over the next several weeks, while still living under that roof, cooking breakfasts at 6 a.m., enduring Linda's comments about my attitude changing, I quietly worked with Patricia through secure email, sending her scanned comparisons of my actual signature from other documents against the one on the transfer authorization. Patricia's preliminary assessment was clear. The signature on the transfer document showed significant inconsistencies in pressure, stroke pattern, and letter formation compared to my genuine signature, strongly suggesting forgery. With that report in hand, Rachel began drafting a formal legal complaint, but I wanted more than just money back. I wanted the truth exposed in front of the entire family, because I knew Linda well enough by now to understand that money quietly returned in a settlement would never truly humble her. She would find a way to spin the story, to make herself the victim, to convince Daniel and Ashley and everyone else that I was the greedy, ungrateful daughter-in-law who tore the family apart over money. I needed a moment where the truth couldn't be twisted, where the evidence would speak louder than her excuses. Rachel and I planned it carefully. We decided that once the formal legal complaint was ready to file, we would time it around Thanksgiving, a holiday where the entire extended family, including Linda's sister, a few cousins, and close family friends, would all be gathered at the house. Not to create a scene for entertainment, but because I wanted witnesses, people who couldn't be manipulated later into believing a revised version of events, people who would see the actual documents and hear Linda's own reaction in real time. In the weeks leading up to Thanksgiving, I continued my quiet performance. I made breakfast every morning at 6 a.m. I smiled, I nodded, I let Linda believe she had fully broken me into submission. Daniel, oddly, seemed to soften slightly during this time, maybe sensing something had shifted in me, though he clearly had no idea what. He started helping a little more with Sophie at night, small gestures that once would have meant everything to me, but now felt too little, far too late. I had already seen the text message. I already knew he chose silence over protecting me. 2 days before Thanksgiving, Rachel officially filed the civil complaint on my behalf against Gerald and Linda Carter, citing forgery, breach of fiduciary responsibility regarding funds held temporarily in a joint arrangement, and financial exploitation. Because of how the original account had been structured with my father's estate attorney, we were also able to loop in the county prosecutor's office for a preliminary forgery review, since forged signatures on financial transfer documents can constitute a criminal matter in Ohio, separate from the civil recovery case. Rachel warned me this could take months to fully resolve, but the filing itself, along with formal notice being sent to Gerald and Linda, would happen right before the holiday. I wanted them served with that notice before Thanksgiving dinner, not after. Thanksgiving morning arrived, and the house was full of relatives, the smell of turkey and cinnamon filling every room, kids running around, the television playing football in the background. I was in the kitchen, of course, helping prepare dishes I had spent all week planning meticulously, though this time for very different reasons than usual. Around 2 p.m, right as everyone was gathering around the dining table, there was a knock at the door. A process server, dressed professionally, asked specifically for Gerald and Linda Carter, and delivered formal legal documents right there in front of Linda's sister, several cousins, and a few close family friends who had already arrived for dinner. Linda's face, went white as she took the envelope, and Gerald, usually silent, immediately asked, "What in the world is this?" The room went quiet, that heavy kind of silence where everyone senses something enormous is happening but doesn't yet understand what. Linda tried to laugh it off, saying something about a mistake, a misunderstanding, maybe even a scam, shoving the papers aside as she tried to usher the process server out the door. I stood up from my seat at the table, my heart pounding but my voice steady, and I said, "It's not a mistake, Linda. It's a lawsuit for the $250,000. You and Gerald stole from me using a forged signature on my father's inheritance." The gasp that went through that room was almost audible enough to shake the walls. Daniel turned to me, stunned, saying, "Emily, what are you talking about?" I looked directly at him and said, "Ask your mother, Daniel. Ask her about the joint investment account. Ask her why she told you not to mention it to me until I was, and I quote, more settled after the baby." His face changed instantly, the color draining from it, because he recognized his own words being repeated back to him, words he thought had been buried in a forgotten text thread. Linda's sister, visibly shocked, asked, "Linda, is this true?" Linda tried to deflect, saying I misunderstood everything, that the money was simply being managed for our future as a family, that I had agreed to it verbally at some point during a stressful pregnancy conversation I supposedly didn't remember. Clearly, I had prepared for exactly this kind of denial. I calmly pulled out printed copies I had brought specifically for this moment. Evidence I'd been holding on to for months, and I placed them on the table for everyone to see. The forged signature beside my real signature with Patricia's preliminary comparison notes, the bank transfer document, and the printed screenshot of the text message where Linda explicitly told Daniel not to mention the transfer to me. "I never signed this document," I said, my voice shaking slightly now. Not from fear, but from the sheer release of finally saying it out loud in front of everyone. "A forensic document examiner has already confirmed the signature doesn't match mine. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is fraud, and I have a lawyer, and the county prosecutor's office is already reviewing it for criminal forgery." Gerald sat down heavily in his chair, saying nothing, his face a mixture of shame and disbelief, looking at Linda like he was seeing a stranger for the first time in 30 years of marriage. Ashley, of all people, was the one who spoke next, quietly saying, "Mom, is this why you kept pushing me to take that loan from the joint account for my business last year?" Was that Emily's money? The betrayal cracked wider open right there in that dining room, revealing layers I hadn't even fully known about myself. That Linda had likely used portions of my inheritance not just to hoard for herself, but potentially to fund other family expenses, all without my knowledge or consent. Linda finally broke down, insisting through tears that she did it for the family, that she assumed I would eventually understand once everything was settled, that she never meant for it to feel like theft. I looked at her, calmer than I had felt in over a year, and I said, "You didn't do it for the family, Linda. You did it because you thought I was too grieving, too tired, and too afraid to ever notice or fight back. You were wrong." Daniel, still in shock, turned to me and asked quietly, almost pleadingly, "Did you know about this for a while? Why didn't you tell me?" I looked at him and said, "I found out months ago, Daniel. I didn't tell you because I found a text message where you already knew and chose to stay silent, choosing your mother's comfort over your wife's trust. I couldn't risk you warning her before I had enough proof." The silence after that admission was different, heavier, because everyone in that room now understood that this wasn't just Linda's betrayal, it was a betrayal Daniel had quietly participated in through his silence. Thanksgiving dinner never happened. That year, not really. Family friends quietly excused themselves within the hour, whispering to each other on their way out, and Linda's sister stayed behind, Sitting with me in the kitchen afterward, apologizing on behalf of a family, she said she didn't fully recognize anymore. Over the following months, the legal process moved forward exactly as Rachel had outlined. The forensic handwriting analysis was formally submitted and upheld under scrutiny, confirming without reasonable doubt that the signature on the transfer document was not mine. Facing overwhelming evidence and wanting to avoid a lengthy criminal forgery trial that could result in actual jail time for both of them, Gerald and Linda's own attorney advised them to settle the civil case rather than fight it in court. The settlement required full repayment of the $250,000, plus a portion of accrued interest and my legal fees, paid directly into an account solely under my name, one that neither Daniel, Gerald, nor Linda had any access to whatsoever. The county prosecutor's office ultimately agreed to defer criminal charges against Linda and Gerald contingent on full restitution and completion of a formal legal agreement, though the forgery finding remained, on record, a permanent, undeniable mark on their reputation that no amount of denial could ever erase again. As for my marriage, Daniel and I separated shortly after that Thanksgiving. It wasn't just about the money anymore. Not really. It was about realizing that when it mattered most, when I needed him to choose honesty and protect his wife over protecting his mother's comfort, he chose silence. I couldn't build a life, or raise my daughter, in a home built on that kind of silence. We eventually divorced, and through mediation, I secured primary custody of Sophie, along with a fair custody arrangement that still allowed Daniel to be present in her life. Because whatever his failures were toward me, Sophie deserved the chance to know her father, and I wasn't going to let my anger take that away from her. With the settlement funds recovered and my father's inheritance finally, truly mine again, I moved into a small but beautiful 2-bedroom house about 20 minutes away, close enough for Sophie to stay connected to her school district eventually, far enough that I could breathe freely for the first time in years. I went back to finish the business degree I had paused years earlier, using part of the inheritance responsibly, exactly the way my father would have wanted, investing in myself and Sophie's future rather than letting anyone else control it again. Rachel and I stayed close friends, and she often tells people that my case became something of a quiet cautionary tale among attorneys in her circle, a reminder of how financial exploitation can happen even within families who look picture-perfect from the outside. As for Linda, I heard through mutual acquaintances that her relationship with Ashley became strained after that Thanksgiving. Once Ashley realized her own business loan had partially come from money that wasn't rightfully Linda's to give. Gerald and Linda's reputation in their tight-knit community took a significant hit as well, since news like that doesn't stay quiet. Forever in a small town, and people talk, and people remember exactly who tried to steal from a grieving young widow's daughter using a forged signature. Sophie is 2 years old now, healthy, curious, and thriving in a home filled with peace instead of tension. Some mornings I still wake up early with her, and I think back to that 5 a.m. feeding, sitting on that nursery floor, exhausted and unseen, being told to stop my drama and go make breakfast. I think about how close I came to breaking completely under the weight of that house, and how instead, that exact moment of humiliation became the spark that led me to reclaim everything my father worked his entire life to give me. If there's one thing I want anyone listening to this to take away from my story, it's this. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones counting on your exhaustion and your silence to get away with everything. Don't let grief, exhaustion, or fear of conflict make you doubt what you know deep down to be true. Gather your proof quietly, seek real help, and when the moment comes to speak, speak with evidence, not just emotion. Because evidence is what truly ends the story on your terms. My father once told me I would never have to depend on anyone who didn't deserve me. And in the end, it was his memory, his money, and his quiet strength inside me that gave me everything. I needed to walk out of that house with my head held high and my daughter safely in my arms, finally free.